we see great things, great Yeshuot, Hatzlachot for everyone who needs Hatzlachot, and Shefa for we recognize the Shefa that we have, and then the Shefa that we don't have, we should be acknowledge that it's coming to our way anyway. Throughout the Shem, also a soldier, our neighbor, Elchanan Yair ben Dvorah Shev Refuah Shlema. He was injured this week, and may we continue. We're continuing to daven and continue to thank Shaul ben Rachel, our good friend Charles, who's in America. Continue for his success. Okay, so we're going to start with Parshat. Ironically, we're going to start, even though this week is Sefer Devarim and Shabbat Chazan. The first place we're going to actually start from is we're going to take a step back in Parshat Bahalotcha, and the reason why we're doing that is we look in the first week. We look in the first psukim of this week's parsha. Moshe Rabbeinu mentions
all the pit stops.
The pit stops. So he mentions a few pit stops in the beginning, and Rashi there is a famous Rashi. He mentions there that Moshe didn't want to embarrass Bnei Israel, so he only hints to the names of the places. So he says, right? He says, "Mi ben Paran ben Tofel v'di Zahav Lavan," and so Rashi there says that these are names of places. There's names of pit stops that we mentioned last week in Masei and throughout the Sefer Shemot and Bamidbar we mentioned different places. So here Rashi. In Parshat Baalotcha, we are, and the reason why why it's mentioned in Parshat Baalotcha is because that's where Bnei Israel start complaining about their being tired of the man. So now, if we look at the Zera Shimshon and Parshat Baalotcha, say Ot Gimel. So we're starting with Parshat Baalotcha. It's intentional. You'll see right away why he mentions it here, and it's an important lesson for us in general. But it's also more importantly nowadays, as we sometimes don't necessarily, or we sometimes don't recognize or acknowledge the greatness of things that we have going for us at all times. So he says like this. V'zeu shepirish Rashi. It's about the middle of the drush, and it says, this is where Rashi says ben Paranu ben Tofel v'Lavan. And so it says, Rashi mentions on Sefer Devarim, which is our parsha, he says, the first pasuk, it says, ben Paran, between Paran and Tofel and Lavan, and it says, Hochichan, Rashi says, Hochichan al hadvarim shetaflu al haman shehu Lavan. So in this week's parsha, Moshe says, Ben Paran ben Tofel v'Lavan. Lavan, he said, Rashi says, is that he rebuked Bnei Israel on the thing that they kind of belittled the man, and Shehu Lavan. They belittled the fact that the Lavan is white. We also know, if you read it, Parshat when the man is given, it says, Lavan, so Lavan, he's saying, is the fact that Bnei Israel were complaining, taflu means they made it tafel, less important. The reason why they mentioned their chet, b'mashet taflu al haman shehu lavan dafka. Why? So the question is why. The question is why did Moshe mention their chet, and the fact that they said that it's white. Yesh lamad the parak yud gimel diktuvot in the 13th chapter of Masechet Ketubot, it says tov hamalbin shinaim lechavero yoter mimashkeu chalav. He says when a person shows his teeth to someone, the white teeth, it's a smile today, a nice thing that we do, it's better than giving him milk. So what does that mean? Sometimes we don't have to give someone something to make them happy and smile. All you do is give a nice smile. And there's many stories of people who, when you just give them a nice word, give them a nice smile, you have nothing else to give them. You can't give them money for whatever reason. Give them a nice smile, a hug, a compliment. You show them the white of your teeth, and then they appreciate that more, sometimes more than just food or milk in this case. Like I said, so he says here, the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave Bnei Israel this wonderful white thing. We call it the man. And he gave them this wonderful white thing with a beautiful, he gave it nicely, kindly. And if you look in the story of the man, Hashem says, I'm giving it to you. Lechem min hashamayim. That's literally what he calls it. The first pasuk is Lechem min hashamayim. So he says, and now you're going back and you're saying is you're making it tafel, you're making it unimportant. V'aleim amar katuv, and this is why it says, Rav ochel nir roshim, v'yesh nispa b'lo mishpat. Kasher ma v'yesh nispa, di'im shayach l'reisha dikra, haya l'omar nispa b'lo mishpat. Now he goes back to another pasuk in Mishlei, where he says that a person Rav Ochel near Rashim, B'yesh Nispa B'lo Mishpat. He says that person. What he's saying here is that it's why is it say B'yesh Nispa? Those people who you kind of some people eat a field. You kind of eat the beginnings of the field. Near is a field, right? Ochel near, and he says B'yesh Nispa B'lo Mishpat, right. Right, and he says, and then v'yesh nispa b'lo mishpat, and there are things that get taken away without any judgment or without any real reason. So the Zera Shimshon is borrowed by the wire that says v'yesh nispa. V'yuvan b'may diter b'choshen mishpat. He says here, "Chnisan shelo b'reshut v'chaltan b'moto al shel bal habayit v'huzka b'achilatan bal hapirot patur v'bay lo shelo achal mishum hachi amar v'yesh shedino k'beimah shekvar yesh la zeh hadin." So if you look at it, the halacha is that in Choshen Mishpat it says a person goes into your field, into your garden he lets your animals in without permission, and your animals eat. He ate too much, right? Exactly. And he hurts the animals because he let them in. Bala perot, the person whose food it is patur. Why? Because it would be better that he won't eat. And that's why it says v'yesh.
Meaning that has that din. That's why it doesn't need a din, because it's punishment.
Exactly. If you look in the pasuk in Tehillim, it says right? A person should eat, anavim, people who are humble, should eat and be satisfied, and they will also bless Hashem, the dorshav. And the question is, what is the connection between the two? He says a person who eats, the only time when a Yetzer Hara comes in is when he overeats. He becomes too gluttonous. He becomes too dependent on food. He becomes too focused on the food.
So less food at the shul?
Right. So I think it's meant to be controlled. He says, what is later on in Devarim, it actually says, if you ate too much, what's going to happen is you're going to start getting haughty. Right? Exactly. So he says, when you eat more, or when you get too comfortable with the way your styles and your life, what happens? You start forgetting Hashem. Right? When a person eats and he becomes full, he says, God forbid, what's going to happen is that you eat too much and you start, getting comfortable with certain things. I don't think he's only meaning about food physically. I think he's also saying is that when you get too comfortable with things that are becoming to you, then what happens is that you take it for granted and you forget Hashem. So then he says here. So he says here. He says the most important midah that we have, the verse mentions it many times, he says the most important midah that we can have is humility. He says the people who are humble, right? It doesn't say tzaddikim, and it doesn't say chasidim. It's people who are anavim. They're people who are humble people. So what is he saying here? The first reason why I started with this one is because the next verse that we're going to do in Sefer Devarim is also talking about this pasuk. The first thing he says is that Hashem got upset at Bnei Israel. You would think, why would Moshe start with, giving them rebuke, with naming the places and giving hints to these places, right? In other words, not the Lavan. Why would Moshe start with that? Like, if this is his last farewell speech, this is the speech, and he says, the question is, why does he start with this? So he says is that one of the reasons why he starts with Lavan, at least according to this part, Josh, is that Bnei Israel, basically what they did is they got too comfortable. What they expect, right? They took the man for granted, and that's what, if you look at Parshat Balotcha, it's exactly what happens. Parshat Balotcha, they start saying is, we're sick and tired of the man, right? Instead of saying is, right? We remember the watermelons, we remember the zucchinis, whatever we call it.
That's part of the exposure that the mom gave them, their level of faith, where how far it landed.
Yeah, exactly.
Pissed off about it.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, they were at a point where basically everything was coming to them. You know, what happens when you start seeing things coming to you, and whether it's it's money, it's anything, you start expecting things to happen in a certain way, right? And when you start seeing things, expecting certain things, and then when it doesn't go that way, you get off the handle, and you go nuts. Like, you just go, and what happens is you just expect it. And instead of like them saying is, wait a minute, the reason why Hashem wants he mentions it here, Sue, he mentions it earlier, but he mentions the fact that they wanted the good stuff. They got sick and tired of the white stuff, the white in the teeth. Hashem was giving them a present. Literally, God was saying, this is the man, this is the food.
The amount of nutrients, there's no waste that comes
Right,
out
exactly,
of the body,
right.
everything is perfectly-
Right, and instead of saying,
What's the good stuff? Meaning, what's better than the white of the teeth?
what's better?
Yeah.
No, they didn't realize that that's the good stuff. They were saying is they want the watermelons. They want they got sick and tired of the fact that it's the same white stuff every day. And instead of saying is, wow, Hashem is giving me a gift every day and recognizing that it's a gift every day, they're saying is, I'm sick and tired of it. Right? So what's the best thing you can have? What's the best thing sometimes when people don't have money? Yeah, right. When a poor person comes to your door, and unfortunately you just don't have the money right now to give. So you give him a smile, you give him a cup of water, you give him something, and he's on his way. But he feels good that you didn't throw him out the door and slam the door in his face. So that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara literally says that in Ketubot he mentions the Zera Shimshon mentions that sometimes the white of the teeth are better than the milk that you give him. Right? So it could be maybe it's literally food, or sometimes it's just the fact that you give him a nice gesture, that's nice smile.
It's that dignity.
Right.
But by the way, very interesting is that it says the time it's like the teeth of God.
Right.
Meaning it's not like they had to suffer something
Right.
that tasted vile.
Right, exactly.
That
It had sweet, right? It had a sweet taste.
There's all the midrashim that they were able to taste
Right.
what they wanted, meaning they're stuck on the superficial.
Exactly.
of the
And that's why, by the way, that was one of the reasons why Moshe got so upset, why Hashem got upset at Bnei Israel on the man, right? Because again, the whole point of the man was to test them to see, do you really believe in what I'm doing? It literally says, the first psukim, right? I'm testing Bnei Israel whether to see they actually do follow my Torah. And then all of a sudden they say is, oh God, thanks so much for the thing, and the warning signs are there. I give you a food on a plate, you have nothing to do. You don't have to do any work. Come out of your tent in the morning, get exactly what you need. On Friday, you take double portion, you're good to go. And what happens? Bnei Israel say, no, I want something else. So the point is that the smile, Hashem was giving them the smile, was giving them that whiteness, and all they could do is not appreciate they couldn't appreciate they couldn't appreciate what they had. So that's the first thing. So that was the first little step that I had. First little taste of what we had. So now we're going to do. So we're going to do now is we'll do Drush. Okay, we're going to do Drush Aleph of Sefer Devarim. So this connects to what we said before, which is that in Sefer Devarim, Moshe goes on his long final speech. His final speech, and the speech can be broken up into several sections. The first section is his final speech, where he starts giving he gives like a final. I know. Yeah. I know. Anyway, so in Drush 1, we continue with the theme of this is Drush 1 of Parshat Devarim. So Parshat Devarim, we know, is the beginning of Moshe's final speech, goodbye speech, farewell speech. And he starts with Eila HaDvarim. Rashi starts there, and just like we mentioned in Parshat Balotcha, he mentions here, Rashi says, Lefi shehen divrei tochachot, because these things that he's about to say are going to be rebukes, words of rebuke, lefichach satam HaDvarim v'yizkiram remez, mipnei kvodam shel Yisrael. So he says, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to kind of blast them out of the beginning, so he does is he gives them hints. He hints to them, he gives them names.
That's what I thought. That's a lesson more in life. Like even if that's true, you can't ram it down the throat.
Right, exactly, and it's a lesson for a lot of things in life. And he says, kashed, but the Zera Shimshon and typical format, we know that if we follow Sefer Devarim, if we know a little bit of Sefer Devarim, we know that Moshe, in Vayet Hanan, he starts, he mentions it later on in the Psukim as well, and later in the Parshat as well, he mentions the name, he actually goes out and says, here's this place, he did this wrong, he mentions Korach, he mentions the Miraglim, he
actually...
Right, he says them, so the point that the Zera Shimshon is bothered by, the Halikaman be'Bishne Torah, right, later on in Sefer Devarim, he says, Gufei hachzirim lekulam be'perush machloket Korach, u'meraglim, ve'egel, u'ma'u shekan satama, kavod yishleh kan. So he says...
What you said about the timing, about starting off.
Oh, so that one answer could be that it's the timing, right? The one point is you could say is, as they say, you want to give a compliment sandwich. You want to always start with something nice in the beginning, then you give the bang, and then you kind of compliment again. So that's one answer, right? That's a nice way to go. The question is, Zera Shimshon says, is if you're going to go with the theory, if Rashi's going to go with that theory that he's going to hint, then they shouldn't have said it later. That's his question. You could answer the way you did, which is one answer. The answer that he gives, I actually think is a beautiful answer because he kind of creates a sense of, he mentions a sense of responsibility that Bnei Israel have. So that's, he gives really three answers. We might not do all of them, but we'll do one or two of them. And then maybe we'll go into Eicha, just one, because the next drush he has, or the third drush he has, on this week's Parshat is about Eicha, for obvious reasons. So he says, V'esh lomar. So his question is why mention as a hint now, if later on in the Parsha and later on in the Sefer Devarim, Moshe mentions them in very blatantly. So he answers like this. Dita b'midrash ala pasuk. We read the midrash in the Devarim Rabbah. It says, "Ru'yim hayu hatochachot lamar mipnei Bilam." Bilam was the one who's supposed to give the tochachot. Why would Bilam be the one to give the tochachot? Because the whole point, exactly, his whole point was to give the tochachot. Because if he gives the tochachot, then Hashem's going to say is, these are the things you did wrong. This guy's trying to curse us. So, these are what you did wrong, Hashem. I'm going to, because he did these things wrong, you're going to get the curse. But right, and then he says here, "V'brachot mipnei Moshe," and Moshe should have been the one saying the compliments. Why? Because Moshe was the leader. So he's the one supposed to be advocating for Bnei Israel. Ela hochicham Bilam. Ela ilu hochicham Bilam. Hayu Yisrael omrim sono hochichenu v'ilu beracham Moshe. Hayu umot haolam omrim ohavam beracham. Right. So he says, either way, if Bilam would have been the one giving us the curses or the rebuke, what have Bnei Israel said? Of course, he hates us. So of course he's going to give us the rebuke. And in Moshe giving us the brachot, the umot and the other nations are going to say, he's their leader. What else is he going to say?
That was there was something, there's like some...
Tochachot, right. Now I have to remember. Okay, I forgot what it is. Yes. It's in Mishlei. So he says here. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Yochicham Moshe Shoavam V'Yivarchem Bilam Shesonam. That the Midrash continues and says, Hashem says, no, I'm going to swap it. Because if I swap it, that way no one has anything to say. Bnei Israel will get the right bracha they'll get the bracha from Bilam, so that way Bnei Israel can never say, Bilam hates us, so therefore they'll be confused. Hashem says, we're going to crisscross everything. So that's the question. Now, the Chen Amar Katuv, Eila Dvarim Kol Yisrael. Ho'il shebal mipia Moshe dafka v'lo mipilam nirim l'Yisrael kamo remez ba'alma. V'enem kol kach boshet panim. So he says, one answer that he gives is, this is why Moshe had to hint to it. Because he says, in order for Bnei Israel to really say, if he hints to it, Bnei Israel will say, okay, I got it. Right? If I were to the one giving hard rebuke, Moshe they would say, no, you can't give it to us. Hashem,
kind of like going on the defensive, when you're kind of...
Right, exactly.
So you're kind of, your natural
right.
inclination is to defend yourself.
Right, so he says here, right. So he says here, Mishum hachi is kram l'remez mitchila. Lomar lehem shekol ma sheyuforash achar kach hulu tov lehem v'lechvodam. K'dei shelo yishmu mipil b'lam ve'inam nechshavim el remez ba'alma. So he says the reason is that he wants to do it this way is so that way you start off on the right foot. By giving them rebuke and with hints to it, they're willing to accept it more, especially from Moshe. Their leader is saying if Bnei Israel hears the rebuke in a soft tone, in a pleasant way, they get the message. They don't need to hear it shoved it down their throats. And then later, when they have a little bit more, they kind of ease into it, right? You never want to start with the hard stuff first. So you give them the hints, they accept it, they're willing to he's created the right setting for it, and then they're willing to listen because he's opened it up in a way that's not so harsh and judgmental. So that's the first thing. Now,
Also, all the forefathers did this before they died. They waited until the end to rebuke.
right.
It wasn't like, hey, I see you at that, Thanksgiving dinner. Let's not talk and let's be all out there. It's like,
So now he has another, now he takes a little bit of a turn. The Zera Shimshon takes a little bit of a turn, and he says, and he picks up on the words of Kol Elad Devarim Asher Diber Moshe El Kol Yisrael, and he says that if you notice that all the things that Moshe mentions, all the sins that Moshe mentions, are sins that Bnei Israel did as a whole. Okay, in some way. Okay, whether it's Egel HaZahav, pretty much almost all of Bnei Israel sinned in that one. Korach, there was quite a bit, 250 people plus Korach, plus a bunch of people.
It was an Edah.
Is an Edah. It was a big. These sins were not meant to be only. In other words, it wasn't just pulling out Korach. He didn't just say Korach did something wrong. He mentions the whole Edah, right? And the question is, he creates another approach. The Zera Shimshon gives another approach as to why Moshe suggested to only start or hints to the sins. Now he goes like this. He says that there's basically two kinds of. He says that the whole idea here is to create the sense of collective responsibility. Arvut, that's what they call it. Right? And he says that there are two kinds. So he says like this. This is still the continuation of Drush Aleph and Devarim. He says, it says in Sanhedrin, Kitanai, it says here, there's an argument, a Machloket Tanaim that says, Hanistarot Lashem Elokeinu, Melamed Shelo Hanash Al Nistarot, Ad Shavru Yisrael Et HaYarden, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that Bnei Israel did not get punished on the hidden sins, the sins that were not obvious, until they crossed into Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And Rabbi Nehemiah says, Ki Yanash, V'chi Yanash Al Nistarot Me'olam, Halo Kvar Ne'emar, Elo Kishem Shelo Hanash Al Nistarot, Kach Lo Hanash Al Niglot, Ad Shavru Et HaYarden. Rabbi Nehemiah says, no. They got punished both on the revealed sin and the hidden sins before, meaning they already got punished. They didn't wait. They did wait. They waited. They only got punished as a collective group only after they crossed the Yarden. Meaning it's not only the hidden sins, it's the hidden sins and the revealed sins. So now he says, Mishum Hacha, this is why it says, Ela Adrim Asher Diber Moshe Kol Yisrael Be'ever Yarden. That's why it says Be'ever HaYarden. Right? It says, Elu HaTochachot Sh'asa Moshe Kan L'Yisrael Mi'Mishnah Torah Hem K'mo Remez Ba'alma. Since they were still not crossed into the Eretz Yisrael, Moshe had to give them rebuke and hints to. He had to hint throughout the whole time because he couldn't.
They weren't ready to be punished.
Exactly. They weren't willing to accept.
Well, no. I mean, he claims that they were only going to be punished once they crossed the Jordan.
Right.
So they were still.
They're still not there.
They mentally. I'm saying at least
They were still in it.
Right. So he's saying is what he says here is that they didn't accept. And he says, if you look at the punishments, if you look at how the stories unfold in Sefer Bamidbar and Sefer Shemot even, and in Vayikra even, every person who gets punished according to how much involved they were in the sin.
Right. But by the way, they did get punished.
Yeah, they get right. Yeah, but they got punished.
Connect to what he said that they don't get punished until.
No, what he's saying is you don't they get punished, but each person gets punished according to what they were involved in the sin. They don't get punished as a whole group, as Am Yisrael. So he's saying, like an example here, he says like this. Right, he says, look. Let's look here, as he says in the Egel. If you look at Sefer in Masechet Yoma, Daf Samech Vav, he says, when talking about the Egel, Zibeach v'kiter b'sayif v'chulu samach b'libo hidrokan. A person who was actually sacrificed the korban and actually whatever, he got killed. The person who just was standing by but didn't do anything, he got a smaller punishment because he wasn't involved. So the involvement
impacts the punishment.
The involvement impacts the punishment. So he says similarly in all these other places. He says is the reason why he gave rebuke to the Bnei Israel by alluding to the sins as opposed to actually putting it down their throats, whatever it is that because he wants to give illusion, he wants to say the people, so that way the person who may have been sinned more or sinned less, they understand. In other words, the illusion is, if I say to you, you did something wrong, you're like, wait a minute, I didn't get involved, I wasn't really that involved, so why should I be yelled at? And then the person who was involved is going to be he's like, I don't understand, he's going to be more, the person who was less involved is going to be more offended than the person who was heavily involved. So he says, is the reason why I alluded to it is so that everyone understands we're all on the same playing field here, and that way the person who was heavily involved will say, I got the message, and the person who wasn't heavily involved will say, okay, he's not making such a big deal about it. The point is that the reason why he's alluding to it is to say is that because Bnei Israel were not yet willing to accept a collective punishment yet, Moshe had to be careful and had to, I don't want to say dance around, but he wanted to toe the line between giving harsh rebuke to the people who needed to hear it, and giving softer rebuke to the people who were less involved. So by hinting to it, both parties are happy. In other words, he was able to play the line and say, and that's, by the way, that's true leadership, is when a leader understands who's there, who's the audience. Right. If you know the audience well, then you know what to say. Right, you play to your audience, but without making it sound like one person or another. So that was the other hint that he gives. Now, that's just one more.
The rebuke towards the end is really bad.
Right, no, of course, but if we look at the timing of that, the rebuke of that, which is in Kitavo, that rebuke is obviously already, he's kind of set the playing field already by then. So by the time that comes around, it's towards the end of his Moshe's life, right. and Bnei Israel are already willing to hear it. Like by then, they're just like.
They were willing or not?
I think they were. I think by then, you've created the situation, or you've created what they call what's it called? He created a ripe environment in which they're willing to listen. Now, in the beginning, they're not willing to listen, so he had to be careful. He had to introduce it. So the introductory statements are always going to be less. In any speech you give, you never go out and just kind of lambast, or you don't go out with your big bold statement first. You make an introduction. You kind of allude to the things that you're going to say, and then towards the middle, and then you repeat yourself towards the end, right? So here he's doing the same thing. He's saying in the beginning, he kind of alludes to what the things that they did wrong, but that way both parties, the people who are heavily involved and the people who are less involved, understand and get the hints without being taking it too personally. Correct. So that's option number 2. And now he gives the Zera Shimshon actually gives another. He gives several of them. So he gives another answer to this question as to why he alludes to why Moshe alludes to the thing to the sins. We're going to skip that one for a second. We're going to take a pause. We're going to take a break, and then I'm going to come back. We'll do another one about Eicha, which is in this week's Parsha, as well as the Chazan, as well as Eicha, and later on that we know. So we're going to stop here for a second. Pause it. No. So what am I? What should I?
This we can do.
Okay. I just don't want to.
Joy.